Welcome everybody back to the sSEC Weekly Show. I'm your host Ezeco, and this is a show where we're going to take a look at simulated Southeastern Conference of the SBFBA college football. This is not real SEC football, even though it's finally here, folks. But go ahead and take a look at the description for the link to the site. Check us out. Take control of a team of your choice, lead them through the regular season and a chance at the playoffs, and maybe even take the national title for yourself. Let's go ahead and get started taking a look at Week 7 action here in the sSEC. A lot of great matchups. All 14 teams here in action again, all in conference play. 7 SEC teams and 7 SEC games, 2 top 25 matchups, including that big SEC East Division likely decider with number 10 Tennessee hosting number 3 Missouri. 5 teams here again in the top 25 for the SEC, leading the way of all conferences, tied with the Big 12, but we have 10 in the top, or 3 in the top 10, which is very important as the SEC looks to maintain that mantle as the best conference in football, which we are. So let's go ahead and start getting a look at our games here. And if you are a fan of offense, just go ahead and avert your eyes as we look at Auburn versus Texas A&M. Because this is a crazy game. Aggies quarterback Jordan Peterson has a miserable day, going just 9 for 29 with 118 yards, a single touchdown, gives up 3 interceptions, and he gets sacked 1 time. He does a little better on the ground, keeps it in his own hands 24 times with 156 yards and another touchdown. But Auburn's Ruben Lopez takes 2 of those interceptions for himself, which was just a day killer. Now, Auburn's Andrew Moncrief, on the other hand, plays out of his mind, completing 39 of his 59 passes for 397 yards and 2 touchdowns. But he also gets put on the ground 4 times, 2 of them coming from the Aggies' Tyler Hill. So this was a game that's dictated by big defensive plays. Auburn ends up running for just 22 times and only gets 99 yards, while Aggies go down 49 times for 264 yards. Texas A&M never attempts a field goal, which ends up being the difference. Auburn converts 3 of their 4. We've talked before about how important field goals are. You got to think if Texas A&M could have even attempted one and converted it, they probably win. This game, 23-1 or 23-21 Auburn. It's a real heartbreaker for Texas A&M. This is our heartbreak game of the week. Texas A&M should have won, but those 3 interceptions, which all come in the second quarter, really prevent them from breaking the game wide open and allow the Razorbacks to stay in danger distance to win, which they do on the very last play of the game with a 5-yard touchdown pass to their tight end. So unfortunate for the Aggies there, but they're just going to have to keep moving on and figure out what they can do. We'll move down to Arkansas now, and their season woes continue for Ole Miss, who lose yet another game, and this one's going to go down to Arkansas 24-9. It's a miserable day to be a Rebels fan, in complete honesty. Their quarterback Marquez Heredia completes 53.8 of his 39 passes for 197 yards, but he throws 2 interceptions and gets sacked 3 times, and it was probably a long day for him. On the ground wasn't much better. It's only 23 attempts, and they only get 41 yards on the ground on those 23 attempts. Defensively, it wasn't a fun time either. They give up 395 total yards of offense and only have 3 tackles from behind the line of scrimmage. The sole bright spot for them was their kicker, Nick Cravey, who goes 3 for 3, their longest coming from 46 yards. Now, for the Razorbacks, on the other hand, that sideline was probably exciting to be on. Offensively, they didn't do too bad. Chris Diaz hits 14 of his 30 passes for 171 yards and 2 touchdowns. 48 rush attempts get you a touchdown, but behind 224 yards, as if you just keep running the ball, eventually it's going to get through. But defensively, 6 tackles behind the line of scrimmage, 3 sacks, and 2 interceptions, and they hold to Ole Miss to just 238 total yards. It's a big day for the Razorback defense and a game they controlled from the get-go. They didn't score until the second quarter, but when they did, they controlled the game for the rest of the entire day. Moving on to the next game, not one I really want to go over, but we have to. Going down to Gainesville, it's another head scratcher for Kentucky Wildcats as they fall to the Florida Gators. down in the swamp. That's 2 losses in a row for a team that was expected to make it back to the playoffs, and they're just getting no productions from their stars at all. Quarterback Michael Oliveros goes 8 for 20 in passing for only 90 yards and still throws an interception. Kelvin Dupree gets stuffed on the ground and only has 86 yards on his 19 attempts. Defense doesn't do too much better. They do take an interception away from Florida and get 2 sacks, but they give up over 450 yards on offense. An offense which is quarterbacked by Morgan Neal, who throws for 304 yards with 31 of his 41 attempts completed. And on the ground, Florida gets it done too with 147 yards behind Ryan Bowman, and both of their touchdowns come on the ground. Kentucky did jump out into an early lead, but after that, the entire game belonged to the Gators. And Kentucky at this point is just looking for some answers. They've got to figure out what is going on with their team. Florida has done it. We've seen Georgia do it. We've seen other teams around college football do it. Kentucky at this point is regressing, not advancing, and that's going to be extremely dangerous for them. So Florida takes this one 20-7. And we'll move on to our next game. We're going to stay in a theme of conference favorite upsets where we go down to Death Valley. LSU taking on Alabama, and the Tigers are going to upset the Crimson Tide 34-14. LSU's really starting to peak at the perfect time here, and they're looking like the complete package. Quarterback Aaron Toomer leads the way, completing 25 of his 40 passes for 406 yards and 2 touchdowns, while they also get the ball moving on the ground with 160 yards on 38 attempts with 2 more touchdowns. If they look vulnerable anywhere, it's through 2 unfortunate field goal misses that didn't impact the game, but when you get into those tighter playoffs games that LSU's bound for, that might become a problem. Now, Alabama, on the other hand, seems to just completely fallen apart, just like Kentucky. Connor Bennett completes 15 of his 26 passes with a touchdown, but he also goes down with a sack and gives up an interception. On the ground, their running back, Chris Williams, can't break through as he and his partner run the ball 42 times and only get 146 yards, and they do get the Tide's other touchdown there. Game was really dominated by LSU from start to finish. A scoreless first quarter, but LSU possessed and moved the ball far more effectively than Alabama, and they ride that domination, they ride that effectiveness to a 4-0 record in the SEC now. So LSU's looking like a real danger here, and Alabama, which at the beginning of this season, as we started to move towards it up to this point, you really expected them to control the SEC, and they're just not doing it. They have completely fallen off. And LSU is the new up-and-comer down there in the SEC West. Let's move it down to Starkville here, and it's going to be an absolute dogfight with the Bulldogs winning it over the Bulldogs, 6-3. Mississippi State takes this barn burner at home. Not really a great day from either team here. Both quarterbacks played decently well. Neither threw an interception. Georgia's Will Altman only got sacked 1 time, and he completed 61.1% of his passes to 7 different receivers for 204 yards. So that's a pretty good day for him. Mississippi State's Mike Hugh, on the other hand, is only 44.8% of his completions, hit 6 different receivers, and goes 188 yards. Not great percentage, but the lack of mistakes, no interceptions, no sacks, that'll make up for subpar quarterback play. Mississippi State's Wiggins makes 2 of his 3 kicks, and that makes a difference in the game. His longest one comes from 42 yards, and Georgia's Chad Zeller only gets called on the field for a single field goal, which he does make a chip shot from 20 yards. Neither team really able to move the ball here at all, and that's less an indicator of good defensive play here today as it is offensive ineptitude. Neither offense was really able to get it going. Couldn't get it across the midfield hardly at all. It was extremely difficult for both teams. Mississippi State did hit the red zone twice, but they missed 1 field goal there, and they do hit 1. Georgia gets all the way to the 2-yard line of Mississippi State, and that's where they get their field goal from. So only 3 red zone trips in the entire game for both teams here. And those red zone trips ended up being 2 for 3 between both teams. So difference, we're going to harp on in this program a lot about field goals, but this is a perfect exemplar game of how important field goals are, especially those long ones. That 42-yard field goal from Mississippi State's kicker, that ends up being the difference of the game. And that's unfortunate for the Bulldogs, who kind of seem to think they're starting to understand their team, and then they just get stonewalled by a game like this. Moving on to our game of the week down in Knoxville, is Tennessee not only playing another game of the week again and taking it at home, but they're winning that second game of the week in a row. They are going to win this one 30-3. They're going to take down number 3 Missouri, who had been looking unstoppable right up until about last week when you started to see some cracks. And just like LSU, Tennessee is really starting to put the pieces together here. They're starting to peak at the right time. Their lowest point being that loss to Liberty, but that doesn't even look like the same team here. Tennessee, Missouri's quarterback Aaron Lehman does his best for the game. He goes 14 of 32 for 198 yards, but the offense just completely fails to score, and their frustrating day is exemplified by 27 rush attempts and only 32 yards. 32 yards on 27 rush attempts. They're lucky they got 3 points off that. Tennessee defense, for their part, they were relentless. They got behind the line of scrimmage 12 times to get tackles from behind that line. And on the ground for themselves, they go 44 attempts, 191 yards, and their quarterback, Brandon Savage, completes 31 of his 39 passes for 389 yards and 3 touchdowns. Now, he does, on the other hand, get savaged by the Tigers' defense, and he gives up an interception and gets sacked 5 times. And that Missouri defense, which still looks pretty scary, gets behind that line of scrimmage 13 times for tackles for loss. Now, offensive line woes aside, Tennessee puts everything together to run the game wire to wire. Missouri's lone field goal coming towards the end of the fourth quarter just to avoid that shutout. So Tennessee takes this one, another big one for them. They move up. I know that says number 22 at the top. Tennessee is number 10 at this time, and you're going to see Missouri fall down. You're going to see Tennessee starting to shoot up those rankings, and honestly, they deserve it. Moving down to our last game, staying in Tennessee, but we're going to move over to Nashville. Vanderbilt taking on South Carolina. This was a Thursday game, and for those of you who doubt Vanderbilt, like almost everybody does, this is another surprise upset for them. Maybe we need to start paying more attention to Vanderbilt because they take down South Carolina here 28-6, and South Carolina just couldn't get it going in this game. Eli Braden, who burned Kentucky for almost 400 yards last week, gets stuffed to just 35 yards on 23 rushing attempts and fumbles the ball twice. One of those was picked up by the defense. One of them his teammate picked up. Quarterback Kamoko Allard has a decent day. He goes 66.67% on his completion with 33 attempts, 229 yards, but he gets sacked 3 times as well. South Carolina's defense didn't do too much better. And while they prevented huge yardage from Vanderbilt, they only get behind the line of scrimmage 4 times, but they do take the ball away once on an interception, and they do recover another fumble. Their only points come from 2 field goals, and they do miss another one, and their longest field goal comes from just 34 yards. And Vanderbilt owned this game pretty much entirely. Their Pedro White took it 24 times for 120 yards. Their quarterback, Rudy Hendricks, hit 7 different receivers for 50% completion, 15 of 30, 179 yards, and he throws 4 touchdowns. If you told me at the beginning of the season Vanderbilt was going to throw 4 touchdowns in a game, I'd assumed that they were playing Liberty, actually. Their defense has a decent day. They get 3 sacks. They get behind the line of scrimmage a total of 8 times. Do pick up a fumble recovery as well. And even with all of that, it took till the second quarter for Vanderbilt to get it going. South Carolina jumps out to an early lead in the first quarter with both of their field goals coming in that first quarter. They're leading 6-0 going into the second quarter, but then Vanderbilt just completely takes over and they run roughshod over the Gamecocks, who couldn't understand the game from the rest of there then. That's our games for this week. Moving on to SEC Player of the Week honors. It's going to go to wide receiver for LSU, Marvin Thomas. He leads the Tigers to their win over Alabama. He gets 8 catches for 182 yards and takes 2 touchdowns. Just an outstanding effort from him in a great game in a week that you didn't see too many star playmakers making just out of their mind games. Marvin Thomas is a bright spot there. That's it for last week. Last week's done. Let's try and move on. For those of us who lost in head scratchers and upsets, it's time to move on. We're going to take a look at our standings for this week. LSU, they're leading the West, 5-2 overall in the season with the 2 out-of-conference losses because they are 4-0 in the SEC. And then right behind them is another surprise, Mississippi State, who's also 5-2 out of conference or overall. Their one loss in the SEC comes from LSU. So that's going to be some questions we need to answer. What can Mississippi State do to possibly get up on LSU? Arkansas pulling up third with 2-2 in the SEC, 3-4 overall. And then we've got Auburn, who's 2-1 in the SEC, 3-3 overall. And then Alabama, who's 4-3 overall in the season, but they get into conference play and just can't seem to understand how to play SEC football, which is weird coming from Alabama. They're 1-2. Texas A&M 1-3 as well. We've been over their woes. We're going to go over them again. They're 3-4 on the season, 1-3 in the conference. And Ole Miss, poor Ole Miss, still 0-6 and 0-3 in the conference, still looking for that first win on the season. Now, if we look over here in the East, we've got Tennessee leading the way, 6-1 overall in the season, undefeated in conference play. They take the mantle there from Missouri, who falls to 5-1 and 3-1 in the conference. Third place, South Carolina. They may be 3-4 overall in the season, but they are 2-2 in the conference. Right behind them is Vanderbilt, who's 2-2 in conference, 3-3 on the year. And that's 2 teams I don't think anybody expected to be right towards the top half. Followed by the biggest question mark of the season, probably for the SEC, which is Kentucky, who is 3-3 on the season, which you could get away with if you weren't 1-3 in the conference. Kentucky needs to understand their team. Florida down there right below them, they've moved up 1 spot. They're going to be 1-3 in the conference and 2-5 overall. Georgia rounding out with 7th place in the East, 2-4 overall in the season, 1-3 in the conference. Hopefully one of those 2 teams can start to understand. Actually, the bottom 3 teams in the East, who are all 1-3, hopefully they can start taking some understanding of their teams and start to turn it around. And that brings us to our questions of the week. With LSU and Tennessee, who's stopping either one of them? They do have a matchup coming this week, but that could just be a preview of the SEC conference game in Atlanta. Are both of them on their way? Can anybody stop either one of them? I'm not sure that anybody's going to be able to. Texas A&M, they've got some questions they need to answer. Why, towards the end of the game, it just seems to fall apart. I think that's 2 weeks in a row that they have lost games that they just lose right at the end of the game. May not be 2 in a row, but it is 2 off the top of my head with, I believe, the Arkansas game and then this game that they just had, that they just drop it right there at the end. And Mississippi State, like we just talked about, can they somehow have some things fall their way and move into that first place spot for the SEC West? Kentucky down in the East, what's happened? What's going on with them? Cat got your tongue, cat got your game. They need to figure it out. And then Vanderbilt. Is Vanderbilt the team we need to be paying attention to? Are they a dark horse contender? Could some things fall their way where they might be able to take over the conference? And an A-B question there is, could you also see South Carolina taking that mantle as well? There's not too much you could see with Tennessee's remaining schedule that could make that happen, But you've got to pay attention to both LSU and Tennessee. They've got teams right behind them who you didn't expect to see and could take it away from them if they don't perform perfectly for the rest of the season. Taking a look at next week, which is coming up here shortly, we've got a few good matchups. That's Alabama taking on Mississippi State, Arkansas taking on South Carolina, Auburn taking on Missouri, who falls to number 10. Kentucky, who falls out of the top 25, is going to take on Georgia, and hopefully that's a rebound game for them. But then our marquee matchup there is number 17 LSU taking on number 6 Tennessee. That's another big top 25 matchup, which probably is going to be your preview for the SEC championship game. What lessons can both of those teams take away from that game to maybe change the outcome or keep the outcome of the game that they're going to play here on Saturday? Number 24, Texas A&M, who re-enters the top 25. They're taking on Ole Miss, and Vanderbilt taking on Florida to notch probably another SEC win and move into a positive record in the SEC. Alabama also falls out of the top 25 with their loss, and so that will put the SEC at 4 teams in the top 25. We'll go over that next week. Taking a quick look at recruiting here, we still don't have any recruiting commits. We get some outside of the SEC with the rest of the conference. So Tennessee and LSU, who are the only 2 teams that have any commits here in the SEC, they do fall down our rankings slightly, but that's just because recruiting season last week is the real big push. Penn State's leading the way there in first place. They've got 4 recruits. 3 of them are the top 5 recruits in the country, and watch out for Penn State in a couple years. But we're going to keep an eye on Tennessee, LSU, and the rest of the SEC teams as recruiting really starts to wind up and get into its big season. And until then, that is going to do it for our edition of the SEC Weekly Show. I appreciate you guys hanging on. I probably talked a little fast. I'm trying to get this one done. It's been a crazy week for me, so I apologize for its lateness and a lot of pauses here for this one. Just trying to get it done in one take so you guys have some content to absorb. So appreciate you sticking with me. I'll see you guys next week. Good luck in everybody's games. If you watch this and you don't have a team, again, jump down to the description. Check us out. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on, a lot of good stuff going on. And I'll see you guys next week.